Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gwozdz. G'day and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gwozdz. Got a really interesting one here today for you guys. What I hope to be the first of many such type of episodes. Got a roundtable discussion. We're going to address the issue of truck parts, maintenance, why quality matters, and what is it that's causing there to be such a lack of it in these fields today. I'm joined by a father and son mobile mechanic team and a young guy from Western Canada who works for a truck parts company. And like I say, we go from these basic questions about parts availability, why they suck, and what is it that's going on with the human spirit and society at large that results in supply chains not functioning, people not caring about their jobs, and the overall degradation and quality level of such work. We touch on the writings of the philosopher Matthew Crawford, as well as the current study of one of my guests who's also going to seminary school while he's twisting wrenches. All three of my guests brought some really valuable insights and experiences to the table in this chat, and I believe y'all are really going to enjoy it. I will share links to their various social media so you can go and give them a follow when you're done listening to the show. Coming up in the next few weeks on Voice of Gwozdz, other guests include Miss Flatbed Red, a sketch artist I met at the Mid-America Truck Show who does really beautiful renditions of guys' trucks. My Uncle Chris, who is one of the first load brokers to open up in Canada after deregulation. I will also be joined by my good friend Brett Hawes, originally from Cape Town, living in Canada now as an expatriated South African. Brett joins the show to discuss the history of his homeland and some uncomfortable parallels he sees with the direction of Canadian politics and culture, and provides us a little bit of a warning such that we don't go down the same road as South Africa has today. All right. Well, without any further delay, let's get to the roundtable. G'day, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gwozdz. I'm Gwozdz. This is my voice. You're going to hear a couple of other voices today, and this is a first for this show, having a little roundtable with more than just one guest. Got some young guys on the show who are well clued in on the world of being mechanics, parts guys, understanding something about vehicles, cars, trucks, transportation, getting yourself around through material reality. And they have some thoughts and ideas and discussions they want to share with all of us with regards to that. We might dabble in a little philosophy, at least where it regards the author Matthew Crawford, of whom we are all fans. And just a little roundtable discussion on all things about trucks and cars, because this is a trucking podcast, which necessitates driving a truck. Trucks break down, they need parts, they're designed by people. Sometimes the people doing the designing aren't very smart, and then guys like Brandon and Josh have to help fix you up. We have Mr. Joshua Gwozdz, who's a parts fella. Are you with Truck Parts Inventory?
Yeah, I am. I'm pretty new with the company, but yep.
Right. And so describe for us what Truck Parts Inventory does. Are you guys like a parts distributor, or what do you guys do?
Yeah, we're a hub, basically a marketplace for used, new, and remanufactured heavy truck parts. And we connect everybody across North America. With the primarily salvage yards, but also warehouse distributors and, occasionally OEMs, but we don't like to deal with them too often, and get people, mainly the truckers, with the parts that they need. Stuff's on back order, so that's where we come in.
You're calling in from somewhere in Alberta?
Yeah, I'm normally from Edmonton, but yeah, I'm down in Calgary, so just a few hours south.
Right, yeah. It's Highway 2 Blues between Calgary and Edmonton. Flames, executive management town of Calgary, office towers, views of the Rocky Mountains. Edmonton, more the working class town of Alberta, where all the heavy construction, oil field exploration, your pipeline guys, they all live in Edmonton, and the banksters all live in Calgary. Is that still the case?
Yeah, you pretty much hit the nail on the head there.
I did a few years in Edmonton myself. Brandon Daly, you and your
Hello.
dad are here with us, and
Yep.
you guys are the proprietors of a mobile mechanic service. They'll come rescue people on the side of the road.
Yeah, we try.
I'm assuming you're successful. You're still in business.
Yeah, we generally are a little more useful than just changing batteries or fuel filters out, So yeah,
Do you guys have a shop as well? Like, and where are you coming from? Do you have a shop? Like,
we're in like New Stanton, Pennsylvania, which is right where 70 and 76 meet, right off the PA Turnpike here. And yeah, we have a shop there. We do like medium heavy duty stuff at our shop, and then we do like semi truck like breakdown 24-hour breakdown service.
right. So how long have you been practicing mechanics? Like, how long have you been a Red Seal mechanic for?
Well, my dad way longer than me. I started at a Freightliner dealership in 2016. So I've been kind of doing it full time since then. I mean, I grew up in the world obviously through my grandfather and through my dad, but how long have you been doing?
Well, my dad used to drag me around when I was about 10 years old working on stuff when he used to do side work. So I'm 56 now. So I've been around trucks, working on trucks, under trucks since then. So
So a lifetime of experience,
absolutely.
right? And a lifetime of cursing poor quality parts, poor quality design, and engineers who, as they say, aren't thinking about the guy that has to work on the truck when they put things together.
Yeah, I would say that the engineering part of it's always been a problem. The poor quality parts, I would say, has really become an issue within the last 8 to 10 years. We didn't used to have the issues where we bought a part, put it on the truck or automobile, whatever it may be, and 2 days later, 2 weeks later, we have to replace it again. We put things on, they lasted. That is not the case right now. We have a lot of issues with quality.
What do you attribute that to, in your professional opinion?
I think a lot of it's the foreign stuff, Chinese made stuff. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff coming out of China, and the quality is just awful, just terrible.
But I also think, I think that's true to a degree, but also I think basically companies can get away with it to some degree. Like if they can hit the best ratio of profit to, enough of their product works, they're not shooting for like, well, 98% of our stuff works. They're shooting for like, well, 93% of our stuff working, or maybe 80% of our stuff working, and 20% like kickbacks. Well, that doesn't like that puts us at like peak profitability, for them. So like, and then because they're hiding behind a lot of kind of nameless corporations, there's no one really to go to and grab their shirt collar and be like, hey, you sold me this like piece of shit, right? Like it's all nameless. It's all someone else's problem. And they'll give you a new part. They're not going to refund your time wasted for putting on a part. So like there's almost no accountability naturally in the system because you can get parts somewhere else, but they all seem to suffer from it to some degree. And then some parts you can only go to like a Cummins or to get, and their quality's all those companies seem to have gone downhill a lot, I think.
Do you have the resident parts guy in the conversation? These guys are throwing some heat at your business. What do you have to say about this?
Oh man, I don't actually think that they're throwing a lot of heat that's unwarranted. Some of the things that you guys are talking about is bang on. I mean, you've got people who are put in a bind. They wouldn't be coming to the OEMs. They wouldn't be going to people if they didn't need help. And so then you've got people who can get away with this, these faceless corporations. There's the occasional group that actually has a is very accountable. I'm not sure if you're familiar with SRC, based out of Springfield down in Missouri. Springfield Remanufacturing Corp. They work directly with a lot of the OEMs, and they themselves are very accountable, but they are an arm's length corporation from a lot of these OEMs. So they do a lot of the remanufacturing and repairing of this stuff. Their kickback rates are really low. Like they take their process, which we actually toured recently, was very impressive for an OEM. Their failure rates were next to nothing. But the thing is, it's them doing it. It's not Cummins. It's still the OEM product, but they're remanufacturing it, they're repairing it. They're still in the salvage side of things. And so you get that issue with the OEM stuff where, you know, they can get away with it and there's nobody to go and chase down and, like you said, hold them by the collar and go, what the hell? What did you just sell me? Whereas on the salvage side of things, when you've got guys running family-owned mom and pop shops who take a great amount of pride and put a great amount of time and effort and money into what they do, they're not going to sell you something that's going to, you know, shit the bed in a couple weeks. They're not going to do that because that doesn't benefit them. That doesn't benefit you because then you have to come back in a couple weeks. And so there is this great disconnect between OEMs and, you know, the top of the pyramid where people go when they're looking for parts, and the bottom of the pyramid where a lot of these parts are sitting and nobody's going there.
Well, what would you say, coming from the world of parts, Josh, with the part itself? Is it the material in it? Is it the plastics? Is it the steel? Is it the raw materials? Is it the assembly? What do you think is the biggest problem with the problems, as it were?
Yeah, it's a bit of everything. Honestly, you've got people trying to meet quotas. You've got these higher ups people when they're working for these OEMs, they're trying to meet quotas, and so when you get stuff like COVID that just put everything on backlog and screwed up so much stuff, they're trying to make up time, they're trying to make up profit. They're gonna, you know, basically outsource their stuff to places like China, like what you saw. Like almost none of the manufacturing is done here in North America. It's all pretty much overseas or you know, down south. It's just not found here. So the material is definitely a big part of it. But the main issue is the actually, you know what, I'm going to scratch that. It is the material. And actually, specifically, electronic components are where we're finding a lot of stuff's going wrong. And I mean, a lot of that's on back order, but you get this cheap plastic crap that's made, this composite that is kind of taking the place of a lot of stuff. And it's not built like the older, it's not like the older metal. You know, you have, they'll throw something in there like, oh yeah, it's got less weight, you know, you're going to get better, you know, miles per gallon and all that stuff. But, you know, when something goes wrong, it goes really wrong. It doesn't just go, you know, kind of wrong. It's a gong show.
So Brandon started off saying he began his career working for Freightliner. There was a super viral video that came out about the same time you started, Brandon, 2016. There's a gentleman, he was in northern Saskatchewan or northern Alberta somewhere, and he was doing a selfie video, and his truck was pulled over on the side of the road out in the bush. It was some kind of vac truck or other oil field service setup, and he had the hood up, and he was going off about hose clamps, and he went on this big spiel about, you know, the new Detroit engine, you know, Freightliner developed. It spent all these billions of dollars developing this new motor, and then he goes around with his phone and he's like, "Look at all these," and it's all plastic hose clamps. Whose bright idea was that? I mean, I'm not an engineer, but something tells me that on a piece of equipment that's really, really hot all the time, maybe plastic hose clamps is a bad idea. Like how does an obviously bad idea like that make it through engineering and manufacturing processes to get to a product being sold to the public without someone going, hold on a minute? Like, how does that happen? Does anybody here have any idea about that?
I mean, I could take a guess. I think there's a lot that contributes to it, but you know, I mean, a lot of times, yeah, I think there's a bunch. So one thing I think is almost like, sometimes I think it's engineering ego, honestly, because like someone comes up they're constantly scratching their heads like, how can we make this thing better? And to some degree, they're like reinventing the wheel. So it's like, oh, check out these new plastic things. They're going to work so great. And then they field test them, or not even really. Then they field test them, I mean, in real life, not field test them to figure out their use, right? And then I think a lot of times those people are very like fragile. So it takes a lot for them to finally admit that this was a bad idea, you know, because this was like the next greatest thing. And obviously, too, I think it's cost. I mean, maybe if you change out all the metal hose clamps on a truck, you save like, maybe you save like, you know, $40 or something, you know, and meanwhile, you spent like, you know, $200,000 on this machine that's able to like heat and shrink wrap these like hose clamps, you know, because they like press them on there, they like shrink them up so they hold. So when you factor in all that stuff, it's like, okay, well, did you actually save anything? But I think some of it's reinventing the wheel, and yeah.
On the point about reinventing the wheel, the internal combustion engine is now basically 140 years old. You know, Rudolf Diesel, when was his first engine? Like 1883, something like that?
Yeah, it was something like that. I know that he started to work. See, his teachers were the inventors of modern refrigeration. So when he first dabbled with engines, he was using refrigerants, which are like highly corrosive, before he even started using what we now call diesel. So yeah, it was like late 1800s for sure.
Right. So the point is on the reinventing the wheel, we've had this basic layout of the diesel engine. You know, most big truck engines are inline 6 cylinders, you know, varying displacements, you know, depending on the application, say 9 liters up to 16 or something like that. You can only, like, there's only so much you can do to improve on this platform, right? Like, it is what it is, and all the nibbling around the edges, what gain are you getting from that? You know, like at some point, like, you just have to say to yourself, this N14 Cummins is pretty damn good, and it works, and it'll last a long time if you operate it correctly. Let's just keep making an N14. Why do they keep having to make all this new dumb shit? Like, can you speak to that?
I mean, obviously, moving away from engines like N14, which are like incredibly reliable engines. You've seen one, what, split the crankshaft and just put a new crank in it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've seen M14s put the piston in the cylinder sideways and never break the drivetrain of the engine. They're incredibly strong. But what happens is the N14 only met its demise because the EPA upped the ante on NOx and what the output of the engine could be. I mean, you could probably have an N14 and put an after treatment system on it, and it would probably be okay. But you know, they decided to reinvent the wheels, kind of like what Brandon said, and like completely change the platform and go to the ISX platform. First with 2 cams, and then they went back to a single cam in the head design. So there's a lot going on there. And also with the redesigning of these engines being designed so quickly, they haven't been able to field test them as well as they can. Hence, you see all the problems that like the Max Force engines had in the internationals and a lot of the CAT engines with their after treatment. So it's not proven technology. It's being pushed by the EPA, so they're not getting a good chance to really prove it before they put it out there. And the N14 absolutely was a reliable engine, one of my favorite engines to work on. Super easy to build, real user friendly, and it did a phenomenal job. Matter of fact, I have a friend that I do some work on his trucks for him occasionally. He has a small trucking company. He runs almost all N14s, and those things are incredible. They just keep running.
Yeah, and what cost? I mean, what price tag you put on all the excess labor that's now put into a lot of these systems today? Not to mention all the all the tow bills. State like Pennsylvania, you can't tow combination. So anytime you're towing anything, you're bringing out a wrecker. You're bringing out another truck if it's got a trailer attached to it. You know, so I mean, it's really like when you start thinking about net gains. Well, you can't even think about it because it'll just drive you crazy. But
and I mean, the issue here, you know, for the end users and you guys are servicing those end users like me driving the truck, my boss who owns the truck, and all the gazillions of owner operators and businesses large and small, is we are absorbing all of these costs and headaches. And it seems like the end user, there's this thing in like American Canadian culture, Western capitalist culture, that the customer is king. You do what the customer needs. You offer a product or service that's reliable and provides value to your customer, and then you develop a relationship and you keep selling them that product or service based on the value you've delivered and that reliability. But it seems like with vehicles in particular and trucks specifically, that's not the case anymore. Like, the government just seems to think that like the trucking industry has got a gazillion dollars somewhere to absorb all of these costs from emission control mandates, all the wrecks and stuff, because they just keep putting absolute morons behind the wheel with no regard for the motoring public. And there's just that idea that the trucking industry as a whole, as a customer of this equipment, is not part of the equation on building, designing, or getting the functionality out of the equipment. Now it's completely, we're building this to make the government happy. Whether or not the damn thing works or is efficient or does what you need it to do is an afterthought, right? And because, to my point about, I bang on about this online a lot, and Crawford talks about this with de-skilling, when you get lower and lower quality operators, then that necessitates putting more bling in the truck to do stuff that a well-trained operator would do himself, which further complicates things, more electronics, more of all this stuff that's unrelated to the actual job of moving a product from point A to point B, right? So like, I'm just wondering, how do we get this scenario, this phenomenon? I don't want to be like all Mr. Return to Tradition, but like, there's a problem here. And it seems like, talk to any major trucking company fleet owner, and like they would be nodding their heads along with us. But like, what do we do to get this back on track? I mean, that's part of the reason I asked you guys on, because I can talk to myself all day about this, and everybody on Twitter or whatever's kind of on the same page. But like, do you guys have some thoughts on this? Like, why it is this way, and what could possibly be done to bring it back to that actual, what the customer needs is the priority, and then we design and build things for that?
I mean, yeah. For starters, you've already talked about this disconnect that exists between the people making the truck and then the people actually using the truck, and even there's a massive disconnect there. They don't take into account the person driving the vehicle. It's all hitting quotas. It's all trying to cut cost. It's all trying to comply with this EPA stuff. We've got guys in California who are, quite frankly, screwed right now, because I'm sure you've been keeping up with all the regulations that are coming out of that state.
So okay, can you drill down into that? Do you mind being a little bit more specific? Because like, okay, so we would know that California basically banned the use of heavy truck diesel engines after model year what?
2010.
2010. So that came into effect here very recently.
Yeah.
I don't really know that anybody in California, so maybe you probably have clients there and people you work with. What are they telling you?
Well, so for starters, they're telling me that they've got all this inventory that's basically screwed now, that could have helped people in California. It's either being liquidated or they're having to ship it way out of state on their dime to the places that can use it. Now, we're lucky enough that in this industry, we got some people who actually realize that we got to help each other out. So some of these guys clued in that we're very connected, and we got guys over in New York and up in Washington and places, so even over in Florida, who are working really hard to actually get this inventory that's no longer useful in California whatsoever, to places where people can use it. The drivers.
So when you
can
say
use
inventory, you mean like other like parts distributors and parts companies,
I
truck
mean
service centers.
Yeah, I mean everything from the smallest part on a truck to the entire truck itself. They move like the inventory is everything. They've got everything. Just it's classified as used, and anything from 2010, they just don't want it on the road there anymore. And
I wonder
so,
how they're enforcing that, and I wonder if it's even possible for them. Given, I mean, California is a big state. It's big population wise. It's big geographically. Full disclosure, I haven't been to California since 2010. I got a speeding ticket there in 1999 or 2000, which I didn't pay. And then they sent me a letter in the mail saying I was a wanted man. I would be apprehended if I ever went back. That's another story for another podcast. But anyway, I haven't been there in a long time. I'm just curious how are they going to enforce this? And does any I mean so these guys are all trying to move this inventory. Obviously, like did anybody think about this like onward consequence of like warehouses full of stuff in this entire state that would just have to get moved?
oh, I'm sure the thought crossed their mind. I'm willing to bet they just didn't care. Back to your point of these, they have this way of thinking that the industry, because it's so integral to the country, to every country really, that we've got unlimited funds and we just got a blank, unlimited pocketbook there that we can just write off all these expenses. But no, in reality, they didn't think about it. And to your point about enforcing it, I don't know how they're enforcing it. All I know is
they probably, I mean, at least through registration.
Correct. Yeah,
So
registration.
I mean, yeah, so at least registration, they'll be able to see what year the truck is.
But it even goes deeper than that because they also outlawed the refrigeration units that use diesel engines after a certain year. So guys that had, say, refrigerator trucks that were older than 2010, they could no longer use those either. So now you got guys that are, small businesses, they own, 12, 13, 15 trucks, had these Thermo King or carry units on them, whatever unit they had on them that had a certain diesel engine running them, they can no longer use them. Now they have to replace that. They have to sell that truck to someone that's going to go out of state with it. Or they have to take that unit off and put another unit on that truck. So, I mean, you're costing, per truck, you're talking $20,000 per truck at least to upgrade each one. So they've basically put people out of business by doing that.
Yeah, not even just the people in that direct line of trucking. They're chrome shops. I'm not sure they're looking at outlawing specific chrome compounds that are used. So that bright shiny chrome you see on showroom trucks. They're planning on scrapping that and basically making it illegal to manufacture and distribute that chrome within the state of California, which is screwing over a lot more of the kind of the showboating guys. But the point is still there that you can't even have something that looks nice at this point anymore.
There's a part of me that's hearing this bit about the chrome, and the wheels of my paranoid mind are turning. A lot of people like to make fun of California. They call it Commifornia because of like how up into everyone's business the government is there. And one of the sort of aesthetic features of communism as practiced in those countries where that particular economic, social, political system did run the show was a disdain for beauty, because to them, to the commies, you're standing out, you're beautiful. That's a representation of like wealth you didn't deserve, or you inherited it, or like all of the like kings of yore from feudalism they were trying to deal with would have bling, right? So there's a part of the sort of communist mind, and and that comes over into progressivism a little bit too. This sort of austere, modesty where you don't show off at all. You just try and look like everybody else. Oh, having a shiny chrome truck? Who do you think you are? Like this all ties together. Anyway, pardon the diversion.
No, it's a good point. Not enough people have pride in the industry, and I think you got groups like that who are trying to stamp out people trying to have some pride in what they do, even if it's on something very regular. Like we don't get a whole lot of shiny trucks anymore because first off, guys can't afford it, but secondly, because it's first off, it's a little impractical to kind of maintain that. Like the amount of polish you're going to need to keep that thing looking like it did in the showroom is pretty impressive in and of itself. But yeah, they don't want, I think people in general, maybe not everybody, but a good number of people don't like thinking about the trucking industry as a whole and everything it's associated with it with having some sort of pride.
Well,
And maybe that's
I wonder if that's because, you know, our government and maybe zoom out a little bit, our ruling class as a whole are kind of infected with a sort of utilitarianism where, you know, systems are meant to accomplish certain material outcomes, but it's just a system. It's just this thing that you kind of have to do, and they forget the sort of human element of actually doing those things. And I want Brandon to speak to this because you've been doing some study, and are you in like seminary school as well?
Yeah, I'm getting a Master of Art in Religion at this little Anglican seminary just north of Pittsburgh.
Right,
Trying
yeah,
to
and
trying
you're a
to
big
finish up.
and you and I are both big fans of Matthew Crawford, and like the what Josh just mentioned, like taking pride in things and in everything you do, the work you do, whatever it happens to be. It doesn't even necessarily have to be driving a truck, but like people attach meaning and value to their work. They attach meaning and value to the industries they're part of, and then that meaning and value will get manifested oftentimes in aesthetic ways, right? So like the chrome on your truck, you know, the way your shop looks, how you present yourself to your customers, the clothes you wear, the way certain work cultures function, the lingo they use, all of this stuff that's not part of the direct physical utility material objective that you're doing, but the things that are around it that are like part of us. There's something inside the person doing this work. And I think, like Josh said, we have people running the show who don't take that into account, dismiss it, or if they're not dismissing it because they consider it an afterthought or they're not thinking about it at all, and then don't realize that the legislation they pass, the way they do things, gets in the way of all of the other stuff that's part of that like value aesthetics package that we attach to what we're doing as people. Am I making some sense here?
Yeah, so I just like I think, you know, the human soul thrives off of like the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? And when you get so entrenched in like late modern capitalism where, you know, you're working specifically for like, you know, a paycheck at the end of the week, and that's all, you need paid. Like you know, people should get paid. People should make more, actually, guys like you or, you know, um, a lot of us in doing the work that we do, you know. I mean, yeah, but anyway, but it's more than that. Like you're like proud of it, right? I mean, look at some of the buildings that were built. I saw this, you probably saw this on Twitter too. Like people post a lot of old, like particularly Catholic architecture, and they say like, you know, we can't build what they built because we don't believe what they believe. And I think there is something to be said about that to some degree, just in terms of it might take 600 years to build some of these cathedrals that were built in Europe and stuff, right? And like I've read that some of these artisans and some of these craftsmen, they would like carve the backs of statues that you would see that would be like, you know, 200 feet or whatever into the air. And it'd be like, why would you do that? Like, no one's going to see it. And they're like, well, God sees it, right? Like they have this kind of, you know, this view that like, even all the way up there, like it's important that it's beautiful in every like way, you know, and because kind of liberalism in general, and I mean like liberalism like out of the Enlightenment, this Enlightenment philosophy, it kind of it kind of turns all continuity of time that we used to have through traditions and people into what's called like timeless presence, where there's really no continuity of time. So it's always immediate right now, and there's really no history, no past, and no like the present is kind of unknown too. So there's
And that,
no like
and that mindset guarantees that there won't be much of a future either, right?
yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah. So regardless, people worked inside a model of seeing themselves contribute to like the human, community through like generations, right? Like through and leaving these things for the future. And we don't really see that now.
I've seen it once using your example of Catholic architecture. I went to Spain in 2012 and I went to Barcelona and saw La Sagrada Familia, which is still under construction. It's still not done. And like, when did Gaudi start that? Like 1920s. I can't remember, but this beautiful cathedral in Barcelona that, even throughout the Spanish Civil War, all parties agreed not to wreck it. You know, it's still there and still being built. Maybe an anachronistic piece of architecture out of time, but like it's still there and they're still working on it. So there's some hope.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements. I mean, for one, I think we have, and I'm stealing this phrase, I think Crawford said it in Shop Class, his first book, but like we have specialized and a lot of that's been good, but also like many jobs consist of like a labor sausage where you just perform one very specific part of that whole production, right? So it's really hard to get that craftsman satisfaction of like, just good workmanship when you're putting a glove box in a car for like 8 hours during the day, right? There's something like soul crushing about that. And in fact, I think it was in like 1913. I'd have to look up the exact year, but when Ford was trying to hire guys for his shop and his assembly line, he had to hire 963 men to keep 100 of them. These weren't jobs people like wanted because all these guys like had agency and certain craftsmanship, and they were being brought into the situation that like didn't allow them for any expression of that, right? So it wasn't until he doubled his daily wage, which he said was the most like cost-saving thing that he had done, and then that combined with the moderate.
Oh, but back up. Did I hear that correctly? Ford said that by doubling the wage he paid his workers, that was the biggest cost-saving strategy he had employed?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, he said that.
Whoa, can you expand on that a little bit for me? Because I think some people need to hear about that in 2023.
Yeah, well, obviously, he was having trouble keeping workers. So he was like, oh, if I pay them more, maybe they'll stay, But the problem there is it wasn't just that. I mean, it was that to some degree, right? But also, and clearly this is argued, but the timing lines up. I mean, it's hard to argue completely. But at the same time, you first started to see a rise in consumer debt, like the installment plan, right? Like never before would you have really taken on debt for like anything other than huge things, like maybe a house or but you wouldn't pay monthly for a refrigerator. You wouldn't pay monthly for like a car. Well, you wouldn't have had a car around that time or just starting to get cars, right? So consumer debt combined with this greater like daily wage for these employees kind of kept employees at a lifeless job they didn't like in order to fund like this lifestyle that they like had chained themselves to, right? I mean,
Interesting. Yeah, I remember hearing that Ford was, for his time, like one of the best paying jobs you could get in America as a working person was to work at a Ford assembly plant. And in addition to this cost savings, another thing Ford said was, well, if the people working here can't afford to buy the cars, there's only so many rich people I can sell the cars to, right? Like, I want the people working for me to be able to afford the product, so it becomes like, you know, a self-replicating thing. So many things are different now. And not to say like, return to tradition or anything, but there's all this wisdom about employment relations, craftsmanship, agency. Like, what do we got to do to bring some of that stuff back? Like, I don't know, Josh, do you have any ideas on this?
I mean, as far as ideas go, I could probably talk until the cows come home. But in essence, you've got, I think, a bit of a generational problem here. One of the things we're dealing with on our end is, with employment retention, is that you've got people who don't really want to work anymore. They've kind of been given the idea that, and they've been given the idea that now that you can get a $2,000 a month paycheck for doing nothing, why would you go and pick up a wrench in a shop? Why would you, even if that is fulfilling to the soul, even if you are helping people in the larger industry, you've got people from, my generation and younger who don't really, or who aren't interested in it. And to your point, Brandon, about for doubling the wages, we've got some people who pay pretty handsomely for doing dismantling and technicians and stuff, and they still can't keep the guys. And the issue that they're running into is that they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. They've got people paying for Netflix subscriptions to try and keep some of these people here, like working the job that they already get paid really well for, that they already, like, they're treated really well. They're learning things almost on the daily, because it's never a one shoe fits all when it comes to this line of work. There's always variation. And we're all kind of at a loss for where to go forward. And so, you're talking about returning to tradition, but we kind of have to return to tradition to a certain extent, because otherwise we're going to get, things are just going to kind of start falling out from underneath us. And as far as ideas go on how to return to tradition, I think it goes down to some education and getting people, I don't know, maybe showing people the light. I don't know how to do that without making it, showing people the dark too. Like you take all this stuff off the road, take all these trucks that are moving America and Canada off the road, and shit goes sideways. I mean, we saw it where I lived, where there was a couple grocery shipments missed. People bought up everything in the store. It didn't matter what it was. I've never seen bare shelves before, but it shocked so many people into being like, okay, what's going on? And then that sparks a whole larger issue. Well, we don't have truckers on the road. We don't have the people to repair the trucks, keep them on the road. We don't have people who want to keep these things on the road. And we have everybody else who tends to look down on them, on everybody in the industry, just because it's blue collar. It's not your traditional college job. There's a variety of reasons as to why this is why we're experiencing this, but I don't know, as far as solutions go, it's pretty much throwing jello against the wall and hoping it sticks.
I wonder how much this ties into a few commentators, and this is not new, the sort of deeper crisis of meaning afflicting Western civilization, so to speak, if I may be so broad. But you bring that back to each individual, like you say, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel to find people to remanufacture parts. The meaning associated with the value of work, and I don't want to sound like all Mr. Protestant work ethic Puritan or anything, or like Peterson or somebody like that, but like not having the sort of self-respect and the self-value to see what you're doing, whether it's working at a scrapyard pulling parts to send them to a remand to one of your customers, or be like me, get out of bed every day at 4 a.m, go haul logs, or you fellas with the random phone calls in the middle of the night to rescue broke down trucks. Each one of these things has an intrinsic value in and of itself. And we could lay blame in a bunch of different directions, but the respect and the honor for that value, obviously there's a cost attached to it with wages. And like, I'm the biggest complainer about wages. I think maybe I just work for one guy who just happens to be super cheap. I don't know. Anyway, there's a bunch of different arguments going on out there about pay, and some people say, oh, we're paying guys as much as we possibly can, and they still don't want to come to work. Okay, cool. I'll accept that as true. But if you don't have that structure inside you to say what I'm doing is worthy, and if other people don't have that to extend you the same respect to say what you're doing is worthy, then the whole gambit sort of, it starts to lose. Do you think I have that right, Brandon?
Yeah, so I think I think you do have it right. And I think one of the roots of that is because you know, our modern culture, this liberalism that we live under, I mean, it really radically shaped our self-understanding of our own anthropology. Like not as ultimately social animals, but that we are individuals that bring like our wills to kind of form like a government and everything else, instead of kind of like a society being there to form us into like virtuous people, right? So I think it's really hard to naturally think about when we're going out and doing our job, to see it as a way in which we're just contributing to the community at large, right? Like I have a really good example of this. I feel like we do a lot of work at FedEx, and we work on these vans a bunch. And one night I pulled this van around. I had to put rear shocks on it. So I pull the van around. I get the one rear shock on, and these vans are going up and down the road all the time. So as much as I can do at that moment to help, to get everything done, then the better. So I put the one shock on. I go to do the second shock. I opened the box, luckily, before I took the other shock off, and it didn't have a hardware kit in it. So I was like, oh, geez. Like, all your bushings and everything. So it's like, all right, well, I'm gonna have to order another hardware kit. So whatever, I parked the van. I was just gonna have to get to it whenever. So we order another shock at Freightliner. We go down a week later to pick it up. We open the box there because all we need is the hardware kit out of it. No hardware kit. So order another shock. And listen, I know the guy stuffing shocks in boxes probably makes like $9 an hour somewhere and hates his life. And it's so important to me that he knows that his job is important. Like it might look like a really small thing to make sure you put this small pack of hardware in with a shock. And, if I miss every other one, who cares? But like, it actually matters. And you don't necessarily see the end goal, but like, that helps us keep all this stuff running. It helps me do my job and not waste my time, like touching this truck a million times, So I think we've really lost this idea that we're like contributing to like the common good and to each other and to loving our neighbor, I think, just by doing the work that we do, like, well, even if we don't know their names.
Yeah, loving your neighbor by making sure you have bushings and hardware. That's oh man, yeah, it's just there's so much there, and it's just interesting that one little thing, like the amount of societal problems that you can unpack in this box that's missing something. There's a lot going on there, and we're all trying to figure this out. And I could share anecdotes all day about selected catalytic reduction systems breaking down and complaining about mandates. And I mean, I do that all the time. It's kind of my brand. Where do you guys think, like, obviously, we're trying to think about this in a little bit more of an out of the box fashion. What are the sort of deeper connections here? And I always come back to this question, like, what do you do to fix it? How do you begin to discuss to fix it? What do you think the answers might be to like improve our little area of the universe here, which just happens to be trucks, truck service, parts, our interactions with all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what Brandon was saying. It's a very human connection that you have to have with everybody. We have a very different. I talk with dozens of people a day over the phone, trying to help them source stuff. And the main thing that we get people from all walks of life, but the main thing that we notice is that they don't get treated like humans, no matter where they call. It's, if you treat somebody like a human, you ask them how they're doing. It's something as simple as that, and they go, oh well, it goes one of two ways. You either get a guy who goes, oh, I'm fine, or whatever, or want to get on with this, or you get somebody who actually takes it to heart and goes, hey, nobody's asked me that in a while. And they kind of open up to you, and you get to hear this whole different side of the problem. And it's awareness. We have a very different perception of what competition, I think, means. And I think sometimes competition gets in the way of us understanding that we're all working towards something that's meaningful in a much larger than ourselves kind of way. For instance, we've got guys over in Maine, just south of New Brunswick there, and we have guys in New Brunswick. And the guys in New Brunswick don't mind helping out don't mind giving tips to the guys in Maine. But then if you go a little bit more westwards and you go into Quebec, the Quebecois people, they're not all keen on helping out anybody, even within the same province, despite the fact that they're all working for the same thing, trying to help the same people, and they're all going to benefit from it. They don't want to help each other. They don't really care. There's a disconnect between how these people operate on things. And so going back to it, treating people like humans and understanding that there's a bigger industry that we're dealing with and a bigger issue as a society than just, you or I, then, I feel like that's a good place to start, is to just get people, understanding that, we are working towards something that's going to benefit everybody. The better the industry is, the more there is for everybody to benefit from. That's the way that I'm kind of looking at it. Maybe you guys have a different outlook on that.
I mean, I think immediately it's hard. I think you talked to a guy, I don't think I listened to this podcast yet, but I think you talked to a guy who was about localism and just trying to be plugged in as locally as you can. Just to
Andy. Yeah, Andy.
Yeah. And I think that's
Shagbark Heck.
I think that's it's not going to solve everything, but I think it does help a lot, like to kind of be connected to your community as much as possible. But I also don't think that's very easy to do anymore. I think we're very isolated in general. So it takes
there's that. And I think the deeper thing Andy's getting at with, his extolling the virtues of appreciating where you're at, working with what you've got, seeing the beauty that's all around you right where you are, is that, and I'm about to say something that's like, duh, but, we're doing this podcast right now. Josh is in Calgary. You guys are out near Pittsburgh. I'm in upstate New York. Everybody is everywhere. And, our whole culture now is built on this internet interconnection, and it's all like out there, right? It's not here, closer. And I get what you're saying. I get what Andy's saying. I agree that if we're a little bit more focused, closer to the heart, you work on what you can, where you can, maybe that'll like radiate out. And, again, I think that's part of the reason I started doing this show, was so that, like, all right, I have all these ideas about why the trucking business is messed up, or why parts of it are really good. And here's something we could do or ought to do to try and fix stuff up. And the notion that, like, by focusing on that which is like closest to us, be it geographically, spatially, and what we're good at, concentrating on those things and making our little corner of the universe a little bit better. Mind you, we still also have the larger forces at play that also require our attention. But, once you start going out that way, then it gets a little bit too hard to fix,
Yeah, I think if I could bring up one thing when we talk, I mean, I think it relates to all the talks we have with automation, but I'm finishing off my capstone paper and I'm writing about this. So I think, we would talk about automation. A problem with automation is how it like programs us or deprograms us, right? Because skills that we don't use atrophy. So it's not like we feel ourselves becoming dumber. It was kind of like, I just commented the other day on a bunch of M2s that automatically set the parking brake when you put it into park, right? It's like, why would you ever program drivers to not set their brakes? That's like the dumbest idea you could ever, But I think, so when we look at, I think we need to be a little weary of automating everything. And I think we talk about those things a lot. But I think what's equal to that, to some degree, is our cultural bureaucratic jigs of automation that have taken what used to be a character or virtue that was stamped on a person and just turned them into like a program or, bureaucratic automation. So for instance, let's say in your Protestant like work ethic, it used to revolve around culture of thrift, right? We had a culture that instilled thrift, the virtue of thrift in people. So people saved, for rainy days, for retirement, for things. So now what we have oftentimes is like automatic opt-in 401ks and like Social Security and stuff. So let's say that the money saved would be the same amount in a person with the virtue of thrift or the person that has Social Security automatically deducted for them, right? But the difference is that the person with the bureaucratic automation of something like Social Security, he doesn't have the character of thrift anymore. It's not been stamped into him. You know what I mean? So that's another like virtue or skill that atrophies by having like something kind of automated. And I think we start to lose our excellence when we lose our agency, and that applies both to like mechanical realm and trucks and cars and everything else, but also to like the like social and moral realm, like too.
I think one thing it applies to is when you were asking about, how do we get back to the basics in trucking? And I think it's going to be difficult to get back to that because, like in my day, when I was a kid and I used to climb up in a Kenworth with my dad or whatever, there'd be all these gauges on the dash. You'd have a pyrometer, you'd have a boost gauge, you'd have a temp gauge for the tranny, you'd have a temp gauge for each rear end, you'd have an air gauge for your suspension to see how much weight's on your truck. None of that's in today's trucks. Guys don't know that, if they're going down the road and they see their exhaust temps going up a little bit high and they look at their boost and they say, oh, geez, I don't have much boost. My exhaust is going up. So maybe I got a boost leak or maybe I need to back out of it. I actually had a guy call me the other day. I couldn't help him, but he called me. He's like, hey, my front diff on my truck, it's running up about 290 degrees. It's getting a little warm. I think I got something going on with it. I'm like, yeah, you probably got a bearing or something going bad. I'm like, but unfortunately, I don't have time to get into tearing it down to find the problem for you. So I directed him to somebody else. But there's a guy there that probably had a boatload of gauges in his truck and knows how to read them. And there's like very few people left out there that have that skill to know what their truck's telling them and how to deal with it. So we got a lot of ground to make up if we're going to start training guys for that kind of stuff again.
Wow. So yeah, we started into questions of automation and training and de-skilling. Crawford addresses this in his books, and one of the big things he pushes and why we drive is safetyism. And a lot of this de-skilling, the automation, the putting in of front collision avoidance and automatic transmissions, and like it doesn't seem to stop. Like they just want to keep taking this stuff away because they say it's safer or it makes it easier. And the lack of focus on making people better, this is one of my main bugaboos, and I hope people understand, like, this is why I complain about this stuff online so much, is that we're doing humans a great disservice by not teaching them how to read those gauges, what that means, how to get the best performance out of your vehicle, what each component on that vehicle is doing, how it works together in a system to get you down the road, the feel for the road, the feel for the vehicle. There's all this human connections to this tool. A truck is a tool. It's a tool for moving things from A to B, but it needs to be worked correctly. And there's value in having someone behind the wheel of it that knows all this stuff. And I just wonder, let's wipe away the veneer of all this blingy, awesome, safe, efficient, electric, whatever technology, whether it's being sold to us for safetyism or efficiency or whatnot. But it's just a veneer, to my mind, to cover up the fact that they don't want to teach people, they don't want to trust people. And the more you do that, it kind of makes like a cycle where it just gets worse and worse. And then the impulse to create more of this technology to fix up the fact that we don't have the people that are correctly trained, have some pride in the craft, pride in being a good trucker, pride in being a good equipment operator, mechanic, whatever. Like, there's just something deeply anti-human about this cycle we're on. One of the things that bothers me in discussing this with folks, not with you guys, not even with a bunch of folks I talk to online, but like there's this like inevitability almost. Like, people feel like there's just nothing they can do about it. And oh, it's just the way it is. Oh well, government put new regulation in, and like there's no agency to like fight back anymore and say no, no, this is not how it's going to be, unless you're on the margins like that guy with a 1983 Peterbilt that like he just keeps fixing the thing and he knows it inside and out. But like, there's less and less of those people around, right? You know, I had the very good luck to go to the Mid America Trucking Show in Kentucky a few weeks ago. Saw lots of those people, but like, if someone had dropped a bomb on that truck show, there goes like 80% of America's old school people that know how to do things in trucking right there. You know, like, again, I would love to speak with Matthew Crawford, or maybe, you know, what's that fellow's name you suggested to me? Brandon Lee?
Lee Vinsel, and him and another guy, I forget the other guy's name. They wrote a book called The Innovation Delusion. It's really good.
Can you, okay, I've never read it. Can you speak on that a little bit and how it relates to this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, they basically kind of argue that we've moved from a culture of actual innovation to a culture of innovation speak. So we use all the buzzwords of innovative, and, you know, he talks about like Facebook's their motto being like move fast and break things, whatever, like all this stuff. But really, like, what we've lacked is like care and maintenance of like technologies, right? So like, people generally want their public transit to like be on time because that's like necessary. It's why they use it. And meanwhile, like,
but trains running on time is a fascist concept, bro. That's from Germany.
Yeah. So what they'll do is they'll do things like put Wi-Fi on train cars or buses, but yet stretch out the maintenance intervals, you know, and then like things break down and things like it. The novel things are like the things that get like attention, you know, because like you don't earn an award because you like came up with a program to make sure all the buses in New York City's like bearings got packed correctly, right? But you like come up with some kind of award because you linked up with Google and now you have Wi-Fi on the bus, which is great because as Rome burns to the ground, you can still at least like tweet about it. But
oh man, I remember, you know about Vancouver Island. There's an organization in British Columbia owned by the government called BC Ferries, and they're charged with running the boats back and forth to Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, and lots of people live out there, and the ferries are a vital public service. And I remember many years ago, I was reading a newspaper article. I was in BC touring around or visiting or trucking or whatever. The government had like taken out these ads about how they'd upgraded the stores on the ferry, like the things you could buy while you're on the boat. And some lady had like written into the newspaper and wrote this letter, you know, kind of a letter to the editor type thing, you know, back in the old days. Newspapers and letters to the editor. What's that all about, old guy? But anyway, the essence of her letter was, we need BC ferries to be on time, to run safe boats, to get us back and forth to the island. It's not a floating shopping mall, right? You know, this Wi-Fi on buses, like, give BC ferries employees awards or a raise or something to make sure the boats work great all the time. And the captains on the boat are always there and make sure that you get back and forth to Vancouver Island when you need to get there. Who cares about if there's a goddamn shopping mall or what you can buy while you're on the boat? The boat is to get you and your car from Vancouver to Vancouver Island, right? Like, the sort of blingification of stuff has like taken away from the operation of stuff, right? Did you have something to contribute to that, Josh?
I mean, yeah, it's distracting people. It's, oh, hey, look over here, look at the shiny thing. Don't focus on the problem that's actually the issue that needs resolving. Because I think something that a lot of them don't want to admit is they don't know how to fix that issue, or it requires substantially more time, effort, and resources than installing the shiny thing. Like how easy is it to put Wi-Fi in some place now? It's you can, like, your phone can even generate a mobile hotspot if you need it, which then other people can use. It's not rocket science. But then you get back, it goes back to that thing about teaching those vital skills and not having those things anymore. I don't think they have enough people to do it, and I don't think they're ready to pay for people to, like, to put people through this stuff and get people trained up to fix the ferries, for instance. They don't want to do that. It's easier for them to go, oh yeah, the ferries aren't on time and you're going to be stuck on them for a lot longer, so we'll make your stay on them a little bit, less hell for you. And that might involve putting in another shop, doing something like that. It's look at the shiny thing, don't focus on this though.
Well, can I ask a question? And I mean this like legitimately. People who decided to put in a shop on the ferry to upgrade that or whatever. Like, do you think it's because those people don't use the ferry? Like the people putting Wi-Fi on buses, like, to me, no offense to anyone out there that has this type of job, but like it sounds like someone who works from home made that choice instead of like upgrading the maintenance like intervals or whatever.
Exactly.
It's like they don't use the bus. Like, what do they care if
Yep.
it's not
It's
part
that
of their experience?
it's that disconnect. It's somebody way up here or working from home, honestly, going, oh yeah, I've never used the ferry, but you know what I would really not be able to live without is my Wi-Fi, and throw that on the ferry. Screw it, why not? you know I think you're right, it's a disconnect, and that goes back to all the stuff we've been talking about, but it's a disconnect, and a pretty substantial one at that, between the people who use it and the people who are calling the shots. And that applies to more industries than I think we've touched on today. But yeah.
Right. I have a question for Brandon, just because you and your dad are tradesmen. We mentioned the lack of people, lack of skills. I'm 44 years old. Something I considered doing a couple of times in my life is getting out of the truck and going back to trade school. There's more than a few people in my age bracket who've considered this. And a problem is that I make a certain amount of money after having a certain amount of experience in trucking. It's not enough and it should be more, but we're going to set that aside. If I wanted to go back to school and reskill, become a mechanic, an electrician, whatever, part of the deal with that is I now have to make a wage which is substantially less than what I'm getting now. But I've got 2 kids to feed. My wife and I are trying to save the money to buy this house off of the person we're renting it from. And it's almost too much of a financial loss for older people, if I might, age myself, to go back, because lots of people, they talk about like you're going to have a whole bunch of different jobs in your life these days. This is the new way the economy goes and people need to reskill. Okay, cool. Let's take that for granted as presented. What can we do to get guys that are like approaching middle age that are like, all right, well, I've done all this other stuff and maybe I could still be a mechanic or an electrician or an HVAC guy or, a welder, but somehow offset the loss from having to go back through the sort of journeyman trade school and all the income you're going to lose for a couple of years. Like, are you seeing any effort to assist that particular age bracket or retraining at all?
I mean, that's a really good question. I haven't really thought about that. My dad's 56, I'm 31, so I'm kind of like on the beginning, testing out a lot of things, and that kind of in between can be difficult.
We kind of have this argument every once in a while about skills and switching jobs, and my take on it is, and what I see is, like, guys like me that, like I've been around this stuff since I was like 10 years old. When I was in high school, I took body shop and Votech school, And when I got out of high school, I immediately went into the collision industry. So I did bodywork and collision work for 10 years before I moved into a company where I started doing more diesel work and heavy truck work. But I've been in some kind of automotive or transportation type industry my whole life. So my skill level has been built up over, say, 40 years. You take a guy that's like 40 and, like he's been a truck driver like you, or he's been doing something else and he wants to jump into the mechanic arena or the electrician arena or whatever. It's going to take him a while to build those skills up that are going to make him worth money. So that is a difficult situation. And most of the guys I see nowadays, there are your younger fellas out there. There's still these young guys out there that they're few and far between that have grown up on the farm or really have that natural skill built into them. But the majority of the guys that really know their skill level and really good at their trade are guys that have been doing it for 30 years, 40 years. Those are the guys that are super good, whether it be driving truck or electrician or carpenters or mechanics. And there's no substitute for experience. There just really isn't. And you can, I don't know, like when I've made mistakes throughout my career, I've learned from them. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to make sure I don't do that again. And I didn't, and then I moved on, and you continue to learn. So it's very hard to stop and move into another trade. And I understand, when you got a family, it makes it more difficult. So it's hard to take that. It's hard to take that, pay loss and try to switch over. It is difficult. It can be done, but it's, you got to want to pay the price a little bit.
The only thing I would say, I mean, I don't disagree with that. The only thing I would say is I do think there's so many opportunities now if you find some tradesmen to go in and just start working with them in general, because like they can't get anyone. So it still would require a lot of time. Maybe for some people it could be more of a transition where they're able to work their normal job and then put in 8 hours a week, like maybe 2 evenings or something with somebody who's still working. Or I mean, I do think a lot of trades guys would be open to anyone who like is longing to learn.
It wants to learn, it wants to put their time in.
Yeah. But still, that's just, it's a hard spot, like, and then just to comment on that quickly, in general too, it's like Mike Rowe talks about this all the time, but your average age of tradesmen is getting like older and older, because we're not bringing in the amount of younger people probably we should be into the trades for sure. But the other issue I have is like, even the young people now that are coming into the trades, a lot of them didn't grow up in those things. They're going to a trade school program for like a year or 18 months or whatever, and then they're coming into a trade. So maybe let's say they're 21, 22, let's just, as an example. Well, someone like my dad who grew up at least around trucks, working on them, handing his dad wrenches starting at like 11 years old. I mean, that's like 10 years of a skill it's like 10 years in an industry next to someone now who's getting out of, and they see all this old stuff. They see a lot of the, it's two very different types of mechanics, like 30 years later, I think. I mean, someone who goes through trade school can, but that like really young development where you're just seeing a lot of these things organically. And just that experience, I mean, my dad was 22, cutting 2 cars, 2 wrecked Camaros. One got hit in the front, one got hit in the rear, cut the car down the middle and put them together to make one complete car. It's like, what 22-year-old has those skills?
That was an early development back in the day whenever we were starting to do a lot of collision work and put cars together that way and doing them correctly. There was a lot of it that happened. That's why, we got into where now guys have to have our titles and stuff and everything, but guys were doing them wrong. But yeah, we skillfully put things together.
But anyway, that was from someone who had 10 years basically already by the time he was like in his early 20s.
Yeah.
So
learning at an early age, being in a situation or milieu where that's possible, I hate to sound like cranky old guy, but we're losing that, because again, it could be any number of things. It could be the general trend towards manufacturing being shipped overseas. Part of it could be safetyism. Oh, you don't bring your kids to work. Part of it could be cultural expectations. We don't expect kids to work. There's not as many smaller farms around, so those sort of informal experiences that a younger guy could have, or girl, or whoever, there's less of those opportunities around, unfortunately, which is something of a loss. I would imagine we're not the only people having this conversation. There's probably folks around trying to ameliorate that. Are you guys aware of anyone? I mean, obviously there's guys highlighting this like Mike Rowe, but are there places or organizations that are trying to light the fire of interest in younger kids into this kind of stuff?
I mean, yeah, I'd say it depends on where you look. For the company that I'm working with, for example, we have a partnership with the local college, the Polytechnic, Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. Now, granted, it's for IT side of things because we don't deal with the hands-on side of things as much as we'd like to, but we're finding that we need people on a different side. But people in IT don't want to go into something as simple as truck salvage. It's if you've got an IT degree, you can go and make good amounts of money doing just about everything. If you go to a big paying financial institution, bank, I've got buddies who work IT for banking firms, and they make a lot of money, but they hate their lives. And then we look at the guys that we get who work with us here. It's not what they thought they'd be doing, but they enjoy it. And we'd like to see more of that. I know of some of our competitors even have partnerships with local mechanics to try and help people get into the industry and be aware of it and know that this is a path you can take, and that the earlier you get this experience and the more you get your hands on it earlier on, the better not only the industry will do, but the better you will do, and the better you'll be able to help when you get that experience. Like when you get up to those 30-year marks, you'll be on fire.
There are as well, I think, some just opportunities I know of that are encouraging to me, that are starting to kind of spring up. Like there's a college in Steubenville, Ohio, that just opened in the last year or two. It's called College of St. Joseph the Worker. So it's a 3-year program. It's a Catholic school. It's a 3-year program, and the person leaves with a BA, I think, in Catholic studies, but also for the 3 years, they've also studied one of like 5 traditional trades. So like HVAC, masonry, carpentry, electrical, plumbing. So that whole time they've kind of gotten the formation on both sides. They've been working with local businesses in that trade. They've also been just getting like a little bit of a more formal education as well. So seeing those kind of things pop up, I think is like a really, really good direction. And it doesn't carry with it that very Cartesian divide of like mind and body. It's trying to hopefully produce like very integrated thinking, like humans again.
A little more greasy fingernailed Matthew Crawford's. I keep mentioning this guy. So have you read like all 3 of his major books, Brandon?
Yeah, I have. I'm trying to go through his middle one again because I'm using it for this paper I'm trying to finish up. But so it goes Shop Classes, Soulcraft, The World Beyond Your Head, and Why We Drive, which is the one you're into.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of my second reading of it. I'm supposed to be, I don't want to say inside take, but like my of the industry view of the push for automation and all this stuff, and then bounce it off Crawford and try and make like a cohesive argument or analysis out of it. It keeps getting sidelined for other projects, and the fact I'm chained to a truck 60, 70 hours a week makes it hard to like find time for writing. But yeah, I've read Why We Drive. I haven't got into the other 2, but the snippets you've sent me, it seems like similar messages are running through all 3 books.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a theme running through all of the books, which is largely that Crawford likes, instead of using the word freedom like we like to use today, he likes, because it has so much baggage, he says, he likes to use the word agency instead. So how do we make like more skilled agents in the world? Agency is being human. Like to erase your agency is to erase something, to erase your humanity, really. So how do we like allow that to bloom and flourish in the world? I'd say that's kind of the thread that ties all of those books together and looks at it, or yeah, all his work together and looks at it from a little different angles. But I've really appreciated Crawford, obviously. And I think he's like a philosopher for our day for sure. And, he's just kind of a badass, because who has a PhD in philosophy but is like a motorcycle mechanic? Like, that's how it should be done, probably.
Yeah, I'd love to meet the guy or get a chance to speak with him. And I think what you're saying about agency, it seems like a lot of the forces at play are trying to undercut it. Like at every turn, agency gets interpreted by the state and by insurance companies and by societal managers as
Agency is liability.
it's liability, it's danger, and we can't trust anybody, and you might cause an accident. And one of you guys mentioned accountability earlier, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit here from this particular subject, but like in addition to like there not being any accountability for bad parts manufacture, there's like this sort of wider unaccountability on the part of these managers of societies, and very specifically the government. They just do really bad things, pass really bad policies. We just spent the last 2-3 years under the COVID psyop. Are we ever going to get any accountability out of these people for anything? And the sort of, accountability and agency sort of exist in tension with one another. And it seems like the accountability wants to get foisted on us. Like we must be held accountable for every single thing we do wrong, and how we trace that accountability is with this driver facing camera, and how we make sure that like we can trust your agency is we have these lane assist systems in the truck or the car, because like we can't trust your agency. But none of that's ever applied to the people who can actually do the most damage in society, which is the government and their handmaiden corporations. And I want to make sure that like people understand that the distinction between these things is very thin. I spent a lot of years as being kind of a political libertarian, and that's become a very untenable position the older I get. And it's not because of age, it's just because of experience and seeing how all this stuff works. Like I don't see a free market anywhere, because a free market would like imply your ability to be an agent and interact with customers and do things of your free will, mediated through your interactions with all these other people. But that's just all getting stamped out by the government, and more often than not in service to like keeping corporations in charge. This tension, again, the agency and accountability thing, like it only ever seems to come in one direction, like towards us. At some point, like I don't want to sound all Mr. Marxist revolutionary here, but like we need to start pushing the accountability back up where it actually belongs. I don't want to sound all black pill or anything, but like it just seems like that's this impossible project over and above the other stuff we're talking about here. But it seems like it's a key component of it, because like for us to have more agency, for agency and craftsmanship and all this other stuff to be respected in the culture, those forces need to be dealt with, and they need to have accountability be like a meaningful thing in dealing with them. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, yeah, I think until we kind of push things back to where they belong, we're going to keep saying a lot of the same issues in different forms. But yeah, that accountability needs to be there. First and foremost, because of everybody else, it's kind of been made our own problem, like you said. And we're going to see multiple other problems that could be solved by starting at the top and working down, or vice versa. But there's such a disconnect there that until wherever this accountability is, it gets back to where it's supposed to be, we're kind of spinning our tires in spot, and that's where we'll sit for the next little bit until things kind of get sorted out.
Well, and I also think, it's one of the reasons why Crawford argues for the trades is because, like the trades, you have accountability naturally. like there's a concrete baseline in which all your work is judged, right? Like for the electrician, the lights come on or they don't. Or for the mechanic, the engine starts or it doesn't, you know? And I think once you reach these certain levels of bureaucracy and like detachment, I don't know if there can be accountability when something's that big anymore and that abstract. You know what I mean? So the big answer, I don't know. Maybe the smaller other answer is like try to form these like local communities as much as possible that are against like the machine, right? And not because, not so, and to quote Wendell Berry, not because they're so enraged to fight against what's in front of them, but because they're fighting for what they love behind them. And part of that is like their own humanity, which they don't want being stripped from them.
You know, operating on the margins, doing like you and your dad's business. It's just the two of you, correct?
Yeah, we get some help. We have one younger employee who works like part to full time somewhere in there. We get a little other help. My mom does some billings.
Right, but like you guys are a small business. You're serving your community, but you're trying to do things in a way that's not like, you know, corporate, right? You spun a little story on Twitter the other day about fixing this guy's truck in the parking lot because Freightliner wouldn't deal with it, or they wanted too much money for some component for the SCR DEF system. But like you guys got it done. You're still operating with these values, with this attention to detail, trying to serve people in spite of, you know, all of these other forces. So like it's like you're operating from your position in a margin. In doing so, you're pushing back against this, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're totally right. I think we need to find those spaces to operate in across the board, you know, and that's one thing. It's funny, like I just signed up for Twitter maybe like 5 or 6 months ago, but it was cool. And the reason I signed up, just so everyone's clear, is because I like the idea of having a social network to pay for, just because I feel like less of a product. So I pay for Twitter, not for the blue check mark or for the, you know, but because if you're paying, I mean, I pay for email too. I know you do, or at least, you know, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I pay for Proton Mail. I've contributed to their project.
Yeah, but, you know, because I want to be less of the product, you know, which is what we are if we're not paying for a service we're utilizing, right? All that to say, Twitter's been fun to find those like margins and those people like yourself, both of you guys, or some other people that are in the same. So, I mean, that's an example of like social technology that can be used can be used well, I think. And I'm glad that I hopped on. I wouldn't be having this conversation, you know, and it does make you feel less lonely, I think, because there are a lot of us, but we're just like, you know, disconnected sometimes.
Well, Twitter and the rest of the social media world, it's just like a tool, right? It can be a knife. You can slice open your deer and cut up all your pieces of meat, clean your knife and put it away. Or you could stab somebody with it. Twitter, same thing. We could find like meets like, or you can yell at people on there all day, you know, like it's all in how you use it. And on that note, I am very glad I got to meet you guys, and I'm even more glad you decided to come and hang out here with me tonight. But as you can probably see, I'm getting tired and I'm faltering and I can't talk straight or condense things and host correctly. So I'm going to wind her down. Do you guys have any final parting thoughts? Anything you want to focus attention on? Books you want to pimp? Things you want people to think about?
I mean, I'm definitely going to check out a lot of the people that you guys mentioned, because I need to be doing more reading anyways. Can always learn something from a lot of these people. And a lot of what you guys have said here is, you know, resonated pretty well with me. I'm very grateful that you guys sat down and invited me on the show. So thank you again for having me on. And yeah, I'll be looking into some of that for sure. So I don't have anything to pimp in that front, but
Brandon?
Yeah, no, it's been great to meet you guys and talk to you. I think just super briefly, I just want to leave any listeners with two different visions of kind of humanity that we could have and work towards, right? I'm putting this in my paper actually, but in 2013, there was I don't know how to pronounce the airline, like Asiana flight or something. Anyway, I think it it crashed, I think in San Francisco. The NTSB said one of the reasons was, one of the main reasons was that the company in general pushed such a policy of automation for their pilots that pilots just didn't know how to fly the plane anymore when they needed to take over. Like that skill had just like left them, right? And they said that it's important that pilots like fly the plane so they don't lose those skills. It says it in the NTSB report. I just want to contrast that to like the incident in, was it 2008, I think, January, where that guy Solly landed that plane on the Hudson River right after both engines were taken out. Just kind of contrast that type of scenario, because we actually like will be safer in a world that like people have learned to exercise their agency in a skilled like manner, right? Because we have wicked problems of the world, things are falling apart all the time, and what we need is not like some system of automation to fix those things, because anytime those problems happen, they actually fall outside of what the automation is like programmed for. We need like the agency. And Solly said this, I love this quote that he said. He said, one way of looking at this event, the landing in the Hudson, might be that for 42 years, I've been making small, regular deposits in this bank of experience, education, and training. And on January 15th, the balance was sufficient so that I could make a very large withdrawal. So I just hope that we don't know what's coming for us in general, you know, but I hope that we can bank enough agency and skill and virtue and care that when we do find ourselves in situations where only a very skilled agent could handle it, that we're able to, you know, and that's what's at risk when we just let everything go to automation.
That's very well said, and a good place to leave it. Mr. Daly and Mr. Daly, thank you. Mr. Gwozdz, thank you very much for joining me. Like I said, I really appreciate you guys, and this has been very enlightening. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Way of the road.
Thanks, Gord.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gord.